Welcome to a new deep dive. Today we're plunging into a really fascinating and complex part of history. We're looking at the intricate and often pretty dramatic interactions between various European nations and American Indian populations. We've got a stack of incredibly insightful sources here that really help explain how and why these relationships shifted over time, leading to both accommodation and outright conflict.
Yeah, it's really striking when you look at it. We'll see this broad spectrum of approaches, everything from, say, alliances forged over trade right through to brutal military confrontations. Our mission really for this deep dive is to pull out those crucial insights about these evolving relationships, give you a kind of shortcut to understanding the core dynamics at play.
It's such a rich topic. It's full of surprising facts, pivotal moments, and hopefully by the end you'll have a much clearer picture of how these encounters really shape the whole continent. So the overview is just the start. What's really striking is seeing how these early encounters set the stage for such different futures. Let's explore that complexity. Okay, so our sources really highlight that interactions between these European rivals and American Indian groups, they basically fostered both accommodation and conflict. And here's a critical point right off the bat. Despite all their varied approaches, Europeans generally, well, they rarely saw American Indians as their equals.
And that fundamental power imbalance, it's rooted in that refusal, really, to see American Indians as equals. It pretty much underpinned nearly every single interaction. It dictated trade terms, land claims, even, who counted as civilized. This mindset, as our sources show, it was like the invisible hand shaping everything that came next. So as a result, American Indian groups were often forced, really, to adapt to this new reality of European presence, which often meant forming strategic alliances or sometimes even migrating.
Yeah, and what really jumps out from these sources is that American Indian groups weren't just passive, not at all. They were active geopolitical players. They strategically used European rivalries to their own advantage, often allying with one European power against another, or importantly, even against other indigenous groups. It's a much more layered story than just a simple us versus them.
That's a crucial point. So given this complex web of alliances, how did these different European powers actually engage on the ground? What were their distinct approaches? How did it all play out?
It's genuinely striking, actually, when you break them down, just how different the European approaches were. Let's start with the French and Dutch. Our sources tell us these powers were generally much less invasive, you could say. I mean, unlike the British, who were really aiming for displacement, or the Spanish, who were looking for subjugation. The French and Dutch, they primarily saw American Indians as trade partners and military allies sometimes. Their focus was really on setting up trading posts, for the fur trade, which was incredibly lucrative, not on large-scale colonial settlements.
Right. So their presence was often less about grabbing land and more about getting resources.
Exactly. And they often maintained, fairly decent relations, sometimes even marrying into American Indian groups to secure those crucial trading rights. Now, the British approach, especially somewhere like New England, well, that was quite different. Sure, early on, English colonists and American Indians did have a period of, let's say, peaceful coexistence. There was cultural exchange. English provided manufactured goods, iron tools. American Indians taught them farming, hunting techniques, useful stuff.
But that peace just couldn't last, could it?
No, our sources are very clear on this. The growing British population and their just escalating demand for land. It led to inevitable encroachment on native territories, and that's what sparked the military confrontations over land, resources, political boundaries, you name it. The British approach, when you boil it down, ultimately involved forcing American Indian tribes out of the lands they occupied.
And then there's the Spanish. Their approach really fundamentally changed American Indian societies. They brought in the caste system based on racial ancestry. It was this rigid social hierarchy, and it basically placed natives right near the bottom, often forcing them into labor systems.
Right. And unlike the British, who mostly just wanted to push American Indians off the land, the Spanish generally subjugated the people they encountered. They incorporated them into their system, mainly for labor and religious conversion rather than just forcing them out. So while the French and Dutch went down different paths, the British experience, particularly as their numbers swelled, it led to this distinct and often violent pattern. We see this really clearly in conflicts like Metacom's War, also known as King Philip's War. As the British population grew, especially in New England, their increasing need for land led directly to that encroachment on American Indian territories. It just made peaceful coexistence impossible. and it sparked widespread military conflict.
Yeah, and a key thing here is understanding Metacom's motivation. Metacom, who the English called King Philip, he was the chief of the Wampanoag, and he saw quite clearly that the relentless British settler encroachment, it would just destroy their ancestral way of life completely. And this realization drove his conviction that the British simply had to be forced out.
And the conflict just escalated dramatically from there. Metacom built alliances with other American Indian groups. He initiated these devastating attacks on the colonists, burning fields, killing settlers. It was brutal. In response, the British, well, they sought help from their own allies, the Mohawk Indian.
And the effectiveness of those counter-alliances is really crucial to understanding how the war ended. Our sources detail this pivotal moment. The Mohawk ambushed Metacom. They killed him. And that effectively just crushed the unified resistance effort. The grim outcome of conflicts like this, time and again, it just reinforced that British strategy, push American Indian tribes out of their ancestral lands as they took over more territory.
Okay, so moving beyond the British experience for a moment, the Spanish colonial project also faced significant resistance, and sometimes surprisingly successful resistance from American Indian groups, particularly in New Mexico with the Pueblo people. Here, the Spanish set up Santa Fe as their capital back in 1610, and they used what our sources describe as, coercive and pretty brutal measures to try and convert the Pueblo Indians to Christianity.
Which fit right into their broader view of American Indians, primarily as a source of labor and souls for conversion, placing them, as we said, at the bottom of that Spanish caste system. But what's really striking here is the Pueblo's powerful response. The Pueblo Revolt of 1680. This wasn't just a small skirmish, it was a major act of American Indian resistance. Their goal was to completely purge the Spanish from their territory.
And here's the bit our sources highlight as truly remarkable. They actually did it. They succeeded. The Pueblo managed to expel the Spanish for a full 12 years.
Wow, 12 years, that's significant.
It really is. However, the sources also note that the Spanish did eventually return. They reconquered Santa Fe.
But zooming out, if we look at the bigger picture, this implies it's not just a simple story of reconquest. That American Indian resistance, especially the Pueblo Revolt, it seems to have profoundly influenced Spanish policy after the reconquest. It actually led to the Spanish accommodating, or at least tolerating, some aspects of American Indian culture in the Southwest.
So even though the Spanish approach was generally one of subjugation,
Right. This episode shows that effective resistance, even if it's ultimately overcome militarily, could actually force a degree of cultural compromise. It's just a powerful reminder, isn't it? History is rarely just a one-way street. Indigenous agency was a real and powerful force.
what an incredible deep dive. We've covered so much ground here. We've seen that whole range from early sort of uneasy coexistence right through to the stark realities of displacement and subjugation, and of course, the fierce resistance that emerged in response.
Yeah, and it really leaves you with an important question to think about, doesn't it? Despite those huge power imbalances between the European colonizers and the American Indian nations, what does something like the Pueblo Revolt specifically show us about the enduring legacy of resistance, even when, total victory isn't achieved? And maybe how did these early, very different interactions set patterns that just echoed down through the centuries and shaped the continent's history?
Powerful stuff to mull over, definitely. Well, that's all for this deep dive. We hope you feel much more informed now and maybe ready to explore these complex topics even further.